Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back. So in today's episode, we are finally going to install some big old meaty pieces of sheet metal on our 65 GTO here, and I cannot wait to get started and to show you guys step by step on how to do the whole thing. Now in today's episode, we are going to do the rear tail panel install, pretty straightforward, and then we're going to move on to install the trunk pan. By far, probably the biggest piece of sheet metal on the car, actually even bigger than the hood on this car. So it's going to be a big thing, and it's a really big check mark off the list here as we move forward on this build. Now, as you guys can see, the trunk pan has already been completely removed. In the last episode, I showed you guys how I chopped off the tail panel. This is all clecoed into place, ready to be cleaned up, welded in as it is right now. The fit check on this, there's a couple little holes here. There's one right here, and one right here. Do not fill those holes, okay? Or when you go to put on your rear quarter extension, you might notice that it probably won't fit that well. Probably actually won't even go in because you just filled the holes that it mounts into, okay? So this is ready to go. This side's gonna need a little bit of work here, just with rebuilding some of this piece here. Not a big deal. We'll cut this back, add in a brand new piece, we'll reshape and make that look brand new. Just to recap up here, as you guys are already aware, we finished up our deck filler, also got all four back here and also the four up front window channels done and ready to go on this car. So with that, I'm going to kind of rewind a little bit and I'm going to show you guys the work that it took to get this trunk pan out. I'll give you a quick hint. It involved the air hammer and a lot of grinding wheels. Pretty straightforward after that. So let's cut to that and then we'll move on and we'll start welding and getting this sheet metal permanently in place. Let's do it. So to start off with, our jacks in the previous couple videos here have been directly in the back here, right on our rear cross brace. Obviously this is going to be cut out of our car, so I had to move the jacks forward. When I did that, made the ass end a little bit too heavy, and so the car is very tip happy. I threw some chain here, some heavier chain, up in my upper cowl section there, and really weighed it down nice, and it won't tip back on us now as we're working. So if we take a look here at our current pan, thankfully there's not a whole lot left holding it in. A lot of the work's already done for us with all these, the rear quarter bottom sections here being cut out. So it's pretty much just a cut up and across the side here. The front's already completely disconnected, so cut down this side. Got a little bit hanging on there with our wheelhouse. And then here I'm going to cut it just short, and kind of like what we did with our floor pan, I'm going to cut it short on purpose. That way I can get in, take my time, drill out all of our factory spot welds, and do a really nice job taking it out. Now, I do plan on replacing this tail panel, but I really want to use it today, just at least for a reference and a referencing standpoint. So you can see here where this trunk pan kind of goes flat, comes through here. This is it on the bottom section here, okay? And so it pinches together tight with this tail panel. So that's kind of my reference here from the back, just from a height standpoint, because obviously this trunk pan is going to be floating completely in the air. And so we've got to make sure, that we take good measurements and we have some good references to go off of. Now, our new trunk pan is actually, there's a sticker on it that I just pulled off saying that it's for a 66 to 67 GTO. Obviously our car is a 65 GTO. So I went through, I measured everything, measured all of our body mount points, measured the width everywhere, the width of our cross brace. Everything is absolutely identical to my car, with the only difference being, you can see here on the tail panel, this piece right here, this lip is kind of curved. This piece right here is absolutely kind of dead straight. Okay, so once we get into the car, we'll have to fold this up and we'll form this to make sure that it conforms to the back of the car. But the rest of it is really, really nice. You can see here our rear cross brace already welded in. These support pieces here, which I did get spares of in my big parts score, won't need those. These are already welded on. This piece welded on, as well as our rear, our fuel tank strap mounts as well. So it's all complete, welded together, ready to go in the car. So I'm gonna first start off kind of like what we did with our floor pan. Now is the time to coat this thing, okay? So we're gonna 415 the entire bottom side of our trunk pan, and then while that's drying, I'm gonna get to work, cut out this trunk pan, and hopefully start test fitting here pretty soon. So let's get to work. tail panel completely welded in epoxy, and my goodness, did it really strengthen up the back half of this car. Now, if you remember, the tail panel that was in here was pretty rough, the way that it was, the original piece here. So this new piece really adds a lot of strength back into the rear end of this car here. So to start here with this side, you know, this edge right here, actually I made that completely out of weld. It had already gotten a little bit too far into it before I realized I hadn't cut that piece out yet. So I grinded it back a bit, filled it with weld, and then I actually just created that line right there with my grinding wheel to try to smooth that out and make it look like an original body line. It's actually better looking than what the other side looks like, which required no repair. So unless I see one of you guys at a car show and you stop me and you say, hey, that corner is filled with weld, nobody will ever know the difference. Not to mention, this entire back piece here gets covered up with our rear quarter extensions. I fit those both up here before we welded it in, and they turned out great. The body lines are very, very close. It won't require much body work once we get to that point. So here along the edges, you know, these were originally factory spot welds, not plug welds, but it's important to me at least, should be to you as well. Don't leave big, ugly booger welds behind stuff, even if you cover it up. Finish them off nice, put them in epoxy, so that way they're not an issue for you or somebody else a little bit further down the road. Here on this side, same exact thing. It turned out really nice. We're able to grind a lot of these here flush, and it turned out great. So with that, it's time to move on to the trunk pan, and I'm so excited about this. Number one, to see it in the car, but number two, to clear some damn space in my garage. This thing is enormous. It's absolutely enormous here, and it's gonna look great here in the back of our car. So as you guys saw earlier, the bottom side of this is completely coated. The top side is in a weld-through primer, which is perfect. Protected the surface here so it's not all rusty on us, but we can still just clean it up with very minimal cleanup and actually weld it straight to the car. So what's very important here, number one, the trunk pan actually sits on top of that floor pan section that's sitting up right there, okay? Obviously it fits in between right there and right there. And then on the back side here, we wanna do our best, well, absolute best, to center this bad boy here right in the middle of our tail panel. Now, some good references here, obviously with the 3 dots on both sides like I showed you guys earlier, but right here in the center, there's a body line that's, you know, very, very visible. That is the dead center nuts of this car. We are gonna mock it up with this center line here, which is also dead center on our trunk pan. So I'm gonna carry that line forward. We're gonna mark this with a center mark here. We're gonna center the front section there and get it all clamped up and into place, so that way we can kind of mock it up, excuse me, and get it ready to weld in. So without further ado, let's get this thing in the car. All right guys, so we got our trunk pan all mocked up here. It's clecoed into place, and this is where it gets exciting. So much more exciting than the window channels, like I mentioned. You know, seeing a giant piece of sheet metal like this get screwed to the car is really, really an exciting time. So once I got everything kind of mocked up exactly where it needed to be. Now, there are some key measurements here that I want to make you guys aware of. Okay, so back here, there's a body mount right there, body mount right there. There's 2 on the top kind of here of our trunk pan, and then there's 2 more just inside of our wheelhouse here on the actual floor pan, okay? And so what you want to do is just make sure that you take good measurements. I went out and measured my frame. I know this is very scientific here, but you know, if I skip over that center mount, which is at the top of the wheel well, it's kind of hard to get a measurement off that, but going from the floor pan to the back of the trunk pan should be 45 inches, bang on. Here, you know, a cross measurement between those two should be 66 between those. So, you know, we've taken cross measurements, worked this a lot to get it to where it's at now. As soon as it was at that point, immediately screw it, cleat into place. That way I can replicate this, because this trunk pan is going to have to come out. I did attempt to get my wheelhouses jammed up inside of there, and if there is a way to get them in there, definitely let me know, but I don't think there's a way to shove these up into the car with the trunk pan in place, with them being kind of fully assembled like they are. So, but yeah, the trunk pan is here. It's ready to go in. For the most part, we still got to go back through, use our punch flange tool. We're going to punch out a whole bunch of holes here across the bottom lip here of our tail panel. We're going to have to screw holes from the top to the bottom of our trunk pan right there. A little bit thicker material. Oh, one other issue too. So this is an AMD floor pan with a Dynacorn trunk pan, okay? So the way this is supposed to work is that the trunk pan's actually boxed in completely up on these front corners, and it's supposed to actually fit in to the floor pan, or the floor pan, excuse me, fits into the trunk pan. And so I noticed that it was a little bit too narrow to fit the floor pan in, so I ended up having to chop this off right here and then center it over the floor pan section. So this trunk pan should have actually went all the way around that. We'll cap this in and close that in. You won't ever be able to tell, but just a heads up if you guys are mixing and matching aftermarket panel suppliers. Of course, I believe the AMD panel is probably the right panel, but nonetheless, pretty easy fix. You know, with all these panels, there's always going to be some tweaking, some slight modification, get them to fit right, but this being another good example that it's not exact to the original factory specifications. So, with us not being able to put our wheel wells in, that's going to kind of divert us for a little bit. We can do a lot of prep here with our tail panel in the front of our trunk pan, but I'm going to have to actually get the wheelhouses up into place. I've got to get a lot of this metal cleaned up here. If you guys saw earlier, you know, I did chew up the inside of where the wheel wells mount to with that air hammer, so I'm going to have to go back through there, rebuild, reinstall a lot of that new material there. So we got a little bit of an issue here. So initially I could not install the trunk pan because of the wheelhouses. Now I can't install the wheelhouses because of the rockers, and I'll show you why. So you can see here on this section, you know, this was taken out by the previous owner of the car, assumed just to cut out rust and rot back here when they started the restoration on it. But you can see they chopped off the outer rocker section here. Part of that rear quarter is also gone. And thankfully, my friends at AMD hooked me up with a beautiful outer rocker panel. So you can see this little hole here that's on, it's actually a little bit bigger than that, it's a big oval. You can see that same exact hole right here, so a really nice, easy reference point. But, you know, I'm doing this right now because I don't really have access when the wheelhouse is in there. It's right directly smack dab on top of this. It actually welds to the back side of the rocker here, and then there's also a section that sticks out even a little bit further here on this back side right there. So now is the time to address that, but just another thing to the list. But getting this done will be another step forward of, you know, having the back half of this car completely done. But, you know, I just can't wait to get this damn trunk pan in. So let's get all this other repair work done so we can finally start fitting our wheelhouses and getting our trunk pan in. guys, so now that our wheelhouse is all prepped and ready to go into the car, I wanted to walk you through kind of everything that we had to clean up inside of here. This is definitely where the most of the time was spent today. And you know, as you guys saw, we chopped off this here being our trunk support piece, or our trunk hinge support. Chopped that off, we welded this new piece on here. We've got 4 holes in it. It's ready to go in. It's in weld through primer now. The wheelhouse itself actually sits on top of this, tight up against there, so I had to clean all this up, weld through primer all the way down. Now, it is a little bit chewed up inside of here, but I can clean that up as we go through and we weld that. It's actually all really, really good metal. And then down here on the bottom, now I'm really glad that I noticed this to at least install this patch here on this rocker, because I don't think it would have turned out, definitely not as nice, and I don't think it would have been as good of a fit had I not done that. So the wheelhouse actually fits into the top of this almost like a cup. Okay, so we've got to still drill about 2 more holes here. This gets welded to the wheelhouse. The wheelhouse itself is going to get a couple holes. It's going to weld here and here, here and here. Now when we were prepping up our floor pan originally, you know, we did go ahead and prep all this out ready to go on our wheelhouse here. Now I will probably hold off on installing this piece, and the reason why is this is gonna, if I weld this together, because I got to clamp it all together and pull it real tight, and it's going to make it very difficult probably to get my trunk pan in here and sitting on top of here. So once we get both of the wheelhouses in, we'll get our trunk pan in here, clecoed back to where it's supposed to be. We'll pull these tight here on both sides because I prepped both sides already, and then we'll weld them in at that point. The only other support piece that we have here, and this is kind of the most tricky one here, but there's an easy way to weld this, is up here on the inside. Now it took some cleanup here. We've got it all ground down. It's in weld through primer now. And the way that you would get at that is actually through that access panel right there, that big hole. You can get in there, you can shoot straight down on top of that. And what we'll do, once we get everything else pretty much welded in on this wheelhouse, I'll go ahead and screw this in, probably in 2 places here between our holes, pull that down nice and tight to our wheelhouse, and weld up these 3 holes, pull out our screws, fill those screw holes up, and we'll be good to go. So still a lot of work to do today. I'm gonna try to get this one done today, that one done tomorrow, and then final trunk pan here on, I guess, Monday, the holiday. So let's go ahead, let's get this wheelhouse in place, and let's get this thing welded in. Alrighty guys, so after a very late night last night, we're finally done with our driver's side inner and outer wheelhouse install. Now it's time to move on to the passenger side. And just like the other one, this side's gonna be a little bit tricky. To start with, we're gonna have to do our rockers here. You can see somebody already did some of the work for me, partially removing this outer rocker piece. But this tab here is across the top. You know, this tab right here is on still present there. So it's really just gonna be sectioning this up and right across the bottom of that channel. So pretty straightforward. Now here on the inside, this is where I definitely did the most damage with my air hammer. And you can see, you know, this is pretty chewed up in here. We're gonna have to hammer this, straighten it all out, make it right again, so that way we have a nice surface to weld to when we install our wheelhouse. You can see here, we've still got some remnants of the old stuff there. That piece up there is a little bit bent. So this is where about 80% of my day is gonna be spent, is fixing all this kind of stuff. So our trunk support here is actually in really good shape. We don't have to make any cuts or any new pieces for that. So pretty much good to go there. So let's go ahead, let's get started, and let's get this rocker patch first. guys, and with that, we have both of our rear wheelhouses installed. They turned out fantastic. I'm really happy about it. I will be much happier once I get the trunk pan installed. And it's right there. I'll walk you over there here in just a second, but to give you guys a quick update here on what everything looks like. So both sides completely installed. You know, we got all of our trunk hinge mechanism, everything like that's welded up. It's halfway in epoxy because we're going to be welding the bottom half of these once it gets into the car, but everything right now is at least in weld through primer at a minimum. Now here alongside, you can see, you know, we've ground everything down. We've dressed out all of our welds. Everything is in primer. Turned out really nice. Overall, I'm very pleased with it. Here in the back, you know, just in general, it added so much, welding all this together, added so much of structural integrity to this car. A lot of it because we welded, you know, these support pieces back on that were part of this rear package tray. You can see here, you know, did some parts solid, did other parts spot welded or tack welded across the bottom there. Now this portion here is still going to get pinched together, still going to get welded, and then we also apply some seam sealer all the way around the lip of this. So, you know, as pretty as the welds may be, or as ugly as they might be, they get hidden by seam sealer, so you'll never see them again anyways. Now here in the trunk, I'll just tell you guys, this is a very heavy, awkward piece of metal to be lugging around by yourself. It was a nightmare just to get it all fit up and into the car and measured out right. So I'm going to do what I can now to drill the holes, to prep this panel, to only install it one more time in the car. And so what I still have to do here, we've got to go around, drill out all of our spot weld holes here along the side and up to the front. Now here along the front, this is a little bit harder to drill out. It's double wall, it's really thick, heavy duty stuff. And so we're gonna have to punch out a bunch of holes in this. We can spot weld that. And then again, down this side here. The bottom still needs to be trimmed up too first, so we can actually do that in the car. We have really good access here with our tail panel, and we should be able to do that no problem. So with that, I think I'm gonna grab a cold beer because it's been a very long day out here. But after that, I'm gonna get set up, get some fresh drill bits ready, and let's get this thing drilled out and finally installed in the car. right guys, and with that we are wrapped up with our trunk pan install. Well, I say wrapped up, we're about 95% wrapped up here. We've still got some seam sealing to do. We've got to get it back in our Pour 15 material that we've got on the underside of our trunk pan. But still a little bit of things left to do here. But overall, guys, I'm so excited to see it at this point. This car has come a long ways, even just here in the last 2-3 days. It's really transformed pretty much the entire back half of this car, and it's almost wrapped up here. We've still got a couple things to do. We've got our support pieces here. There's 3. There's the trunk latch support here in the center. We've also got another one of these on the other side. But all these do is that they go kind of right here on top. They get welded down. Those butt up tight here to this line, and they get welded down. Those will help add a lot more strength here to this back tail panel as well. So we'll do that here in the next video. Overall though, all of our gaps pulled in really tight as we were welding our wheelhouses to the trunk pan, so that turned out great. Now here on the side, in the next video we're gonna do, here are trunk pan drops off the side. We'll get those welded on. Here on the inner wheelhouse, like I said, we've still got some grinding to do. We're gonna clean this up, get it in Pour 15, make it look brand new, gloss black here all the way around. Our rocker section that we added in there turned out great. And then here on the inside, I've still got to make this little support piece that goes, that's going to weld on there, that's going to kind of square that up and eventually weld to the floor pan. We'll do that in the next episode as well. All of our welds here, in between each of the wheelhouses, all that pulled in super tight. They're very strong, and I'm overall very pleased with that as well. And then lastly, we ended up welding solid a lot of the sections here on our wheelhouses on both sides, and those turned out really good, and it's much stronger than it was before. So with that, I think I'm gonna have a beer. I'm gonna relax and go apologize to my wife because this took way too long. So if you haven't done so yet, hit that subscribe button. Stay tuned, guys. We've got to get this thing to the soda blaster here in about a week and a half. And yeah, one step closer to paint and one step closer to getting this car back on the road. So stay tuned. We'll see you guys next time.